Welcome to Your Strata Property, the podcast for property owners looking for reliable, accurate, and bite-sized information from an experienced and authoritative source. To access previous episodes and useful strata tips, go to www.yourstrataproperty.com.au.
Hello and welcome. I'm Amanda Farmer and this is Your Strata Property. Today I am bringing you Reena's interview with Veronica Morgan and Chris Bates from their podcast, The Elephant in the Room. Now, Reena and I were both interviewed by Veronica and Chris, and a few weeks ago in our episode number 132, I brought you my interview. And if you haven't listened to that one or you need a refresher on exactly what's going on here, Veronica Morgan is a real estate agent, a buyer's agent, and the co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia. She's also a previous guest on this podcast, and you can check out episodes 55 and 115 for our chats with Veronica. And Chris Bates is a financial planner, a mortgage broker, and a wealth coach. And together they have a podcast which they call the Elephant in the Room Property Podcast. And on that podcast, they are digging deep into what is really going on in the world of real estate. Each week they chat to buyers, agents, auctioneers, other industry experts, and they want to learn the truth about how buyers are influenced and why they do the things that they do, aiming to make us all better decision makers when it comes to property. Now, Reena was interviewed on the show, of course, as a strata expert, as a very experienced strata manager, and she spoke to Veronica and Chris about how to best prepare for the experience of owning a strata apartment. She spoke about the crucial information missing from most strata reports, the issues that cause pain for buyers of new apartments, why your lawyer, God forbid, may not warn you of all the pitfalls, and how best to prepare for the experience of living in a democracy. She also talked about how much work a strata manager does and how you might be able to get rid of a dud strata manager. Now, I found it really interesting to hear Reena share her expertise on a platform that is not dedicated to strata education in particular, as our podcast is, and I'm really excited to be able to bring this interview to you. If you want to learn more about Veronica and Chris's podcast, head over to their website at theelephantintheroom.com.au, and I do thank them for allowing us to air this episode on our platform. For now, sit back, enjoy hearing from our Reena Van Alst in the spotlight with Veronica and Chris, and I shall catch you next time.
You're listening to the Elephant in the Room Property Podcast, where the big things that never get talked about actually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent, and co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia.
And I'm Chris Bates, financial planner, mortgage broker, and wealth coach.
And together, we're going to uncover who's really making the decisions when you buy a property.
Veronica will introduce our guest in a moment, and I can tell you that you'll want to listen on to find out what you need to know before you buy into a strata scheme, to not only protect yourself from buying a bad property, but to best prepare for the experience of owning one.
Sometimes when there are defects, the newer buildings, it can be quite stressful because there's a lot of, you're dealing with lawyers and because you've got, the levies are getting so much higher because you've got to pay for expert reports and lawyers. It gets really hard, I think, on people, and it can make people more sort of frustrated and aggressive more than they would normally be.
Please stick around for this week's Elephant Rider Bootcamp, and we have a cracking Dumbo of the Week coming up. Before we get started, everything we talk about on this podcast is general in nature and should never be considered to be personal financial advice. If you're looking to get advice, please seek the help of a licensed financial advisor or buyer's agent. They will tailor and document their advice to your personal circumstances. Now let's get cracking.
In this episode, we're picking the brains of Reena Van Alst, founder and managing director of Strata Central, located at Edgecliff in Sydney. And Strata Central's mission is to provide boutique strata management services and solutions with old-fashioned quality service, which is quite nice these days. Reena started her working life as a pharmacist before getting into the strata industry and climbing the ladder and ultimately fulfilling the role of general manager and licensee in charge of a multi-award-winning strata company in Sydney. Now, she's not naming it in her bio. I think I know who it is, and they're huge. During that time, she also completed her Masters of Professional Accounting, which is quite a useful bank of knowledge for a strata manager, I would think, and we'll may get into that a bit more. Reena is a regular guest on the podcast Your Strata Property. I think that's sort of underselling what you do there, Reena. You're on every second week, right?
Yes, I think every fortnight we're on together.
There you go. And you're also currently a member of the REI Strata Management Chapter in New South Wales.
Yes.
In this episode, we want to get a greater understanding of the role a strata manager plays and get her insights into how buyers can avoid buying into problem buildings. And thank you so much for joining us, Reena.
Thank you for having me, Veronica.
Thank you, Reena. Appreciate you giving us some of your time. Stratas, for a lot of people, isn't very sexy.
No.
And because of that, it's something that they don't really think about too much. And so, I guess my first question is there's a lot to kind of consider when you're buying into a property that's managed by strata, and what sort of additional kind of due diligence should buyers be doing to stop them buying into buildings that have got a lot of problems?
Well, I think the first thing that a buyer should do is obviously get a strata search and try and spend a bit more money on that search if possible, because a lot of strata searches contain very standard information, the last AGM minutes, whether there's insurance, bylaws, etc. But really, the communication that occurs mainly in strata by office is usually by email. And unfortunately, strata searchers never, ever ask to see emails. And I think to myself, well, this is where all the information is contained. If a building is well run or there's disharmony, that is where you're going to see the information. The standard of strata management in terms of record keeping is variable. What we find when we take over records from other companies is that they haven't saved all the documents in, say, their document management system, or it hasn't been printed out in the files if they're still using physical files. So when you're looking for a document, you think, well, hang on, there's an email there, but where's the attachment? You don't check the emails. So what's happening to the reports, correspondence, defect reports? So a lot of that sometimes is not there in the search.
The strata is usually for buildings where there's multiple owners.
That's correct.
It's units, and what are all the different types of stratas, I guess, for buyers?
So basically you can have straight residential. You can have mixed use where you have commercial and residential, which again is another sort of can of worms if you've got restaurants. I think people don't realise when you're buying into those types of things, even though they may sound attractive, lifestyle, you've got a restaurant downstairs, but unfortunately restaurants do come with problems, which we can probably discuss later. Then there's also
I can just rats, garbage, smells.
Exactly. And garbage is the main thing. They dump all their rubbish into the residential bins. The other thing is what we call building management committees, where you have multiple entities. So you have two or more strata schemes, or what we call a stratum lot, which is a lot not subdivided. Like a car park, for example, could be one lot owned by a commercial entity. For example, I manage in Bondi Junction Eastgate cost share, which is basically we've got council as a member.
Yep.
We have shopping centre as another member, and then we have the residential component. So then there's an overriding arching entity that would basically look after all the shared services that three entities would normally have to contribute to, such as insurance, fire, etc. Or a lift perhaps that will go from the bottom all the way up. So that lift is traversing through three different legal entities.
So if you own an apartment in that Eastgate, and I know about the council actually because I once got a parking ticket for parking in the council car park, which I'm pretty sure everyone at Eastgate has done.
Probably.
But if I own an apartment in that building and there's something wrong with the building, are you saying there's like multiple stakeholders now?
Well, basically the first entity you would refer to is the residential strata scheme, but then that may not be in their control. It may have to go to what we call a cost share committee, which is the equivalent of a building management committee, because that was established way before that legislation came into being. So, people don't realise that when you're buying into these entities, you don't just search the records of the strata plan, you need to search the records of this overriding building management committee as well. And some lawyers don't really understand that they've got to do both.
Yeah.
Because there are levies that we have to pay towards that entity as well as levies to run the building. So you're not just paying levies for one entity, you're paying levies towards your own building and any shared services that the building forms part of.
And that's the same with community title.
Exactly.
Or community association, I think it's called, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so community association is pretty much horizontal living. And then again, you have what we call community association property, which is normally defined as lot 1. That could include, gardens, lawns, in some cases a country club, a swimming pool, roads, which can be quite costly. So that's, again, a different form of ownership. But again, it's like we call it horizontal living, because it's like individual houses where they take responsibility for their repairs and maintenance, as opposed to being part of an owner's corporation and contributing to what we call common property expenses.
The complexity that a lot of buyers don't understand, and when people are buying an apartment, for instance, they think they're buying just into a building with other residential properties, but often that is not the case, is it?
No, it depends on the type of a development they're buying into. If it's a mixed-use development, then obviously they're buying into several entities, what we call a building management committee. That means that you may have what we call a stratum lot or 2 strata plans sharing shared services, and therefore all owners have to contribute by way of apportionment that's determined, again, at the beginning of the development being registered, levies towards that. So they're buying into their own development and building, as well as contributing to the overall arching entity that governs the use of shared services.
And the issues with that is that, what you're looking at might be the strata report for the residential building, but behind the scenes, there's all these other entities that have an impact on you as an investor that you might just completely not have any idea about.
Exactly. Well, unless it's referred to in the minutes. Let's say the minutes don't refer to a building management committee update, which they should, because normally when we manage buildings, we make sure that we put an update in the minutes to reflect what's happened at that entity.
Yeah.
But if there's nothing in the minutes, then how does any buyer know that this forms part of a building management committee where there's further costs and further responsibilities that are involved?
Oh, wow.
So, how does a buyer even... let's say I'm my first ever purchase. I haven't bought a property before, and I'm thinking about buying this unit. What do I do? What would be the process you would go through to make sure that absolutely everything you need to know, so before you put an offer in?
So I think the first thing I would do is obviously ask recommendations, say from my lawyer, if I have a good lawyer, as to who should do a strata report. And also find out more information about the entity. Like you might even do a quick Google search, might even give you some information. You'd be surprised what you find on Google.
Yep.
And ask the lawyer, are there any other entities that override? Because this is in a shopping centre, or I can notice this big car park that's, secure car park down there. Is this, this is part of the building? How do I know what happens with all the structures governing this building? So you need to probably look at it physically and say, am I buying into a standalone building, or is there more to it? Okay. And hopefully the lawyers should understand building management committees, although some of them don't.
Are all lawyers equal? That's what I was thinking there.
Yeah,
would you go to a family solicitor who may be doing conveyancing a couple of times a month?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. But then again, who knows if some family lawyers might know more than conveyance. I don't really know, because sometimes lawyers have varying levels of experience and expertise.
Yeah,
and I suppose they do have the Law Society does have accredited, specialists in property and family law if you need one, unfortunately. But yes, I think it might be a good idea to do your research in terms of the type of conveyancing that the lawyer or conveyancer has done. Have they been involved in multifaceted type developments where, it's not just a straight strata scheme that someone's buying into?
That's a mistake I've seen some clients make, and they've engaged a solicitor or a conveyancer and they've gone for the cheap and cheerful, $9.90, all inclusive.
Yep.
It's just a contract. How hard's that? And they get the contract reviewed, and then I'm in this constant game of cat and mouse trying to get the conveyancer. They won't answer phone calls, and they're so busy because they're so cheap. And it just ends up this,
Yeah, well, I remember I used to manage quite a large community association out at Newington, and we had many, many bylaws in the community management statement. And all the people didn't even know that they were there. They would, add an air conditioning unit to their house, and next minute we had to send them a breach notice. And what we found out was the buyers that had actually spent, a couple of $1,000s on a lawyer would get all that community management statement outlined to them and explained to them. And they understood that you couldn't just do certain things. Whereas unfortunately, like you're saying, you pay, what's that? Sorry, that's saying
get
monkeys. Yeah, sorry.
No
or gorillas, maybe.
No monkeys have been harmed.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, if you're spending a lot of money on property, which is something I really don't understand, this sort of penny wise, pound foolish mentality where, people will spend an hour driving to the other side of Sydney, to go to Costco to save, $100 or whatever. But when it comes to buying a property, they just worry about spending that extra couple of grand. When you're spending over $1 million, if not $2 million on a property. If you just work out the mathematics on that equation, it's a no-brainer.
Is phenomenal. In fact, I've just recently been really, really thinking about this because also in a lot of the Banking Royal Commission, I know we're segueing here and going down a bit different path. We'll come back to Strata in a sec, but Banking Royal Commission talking about all these really poor, sad people who have believed in spruikers and financial planners and been sold dreams. And there's a lot of this in property, particularly with brand new. They've been sold this get-rich-quick scheme or sold this, you can leverage up the property ladder quick. And I think to myself, why are you abdicating the responsibility for being critical and questioning whether really these vehicles are going to get you really where you want to be? And I think that it comes back down to this wishful thinking, that people would rather be sold to because it sounds better, it sounds sexier, and it's more hopeful than actually be really practical and spend the appropriate amount of money on their due diligence. And I don't know the answer to that because in my business at the moment, I'm thinking, how do I help those people? Can they be helped? Do they want to be helped? Anyway, that's another episode there.
But you're right, Veronica, because, I think people spend more money when they're even buying a car, which is, again, a fraction of the cost. People will test drive it. They'll, look at the reviews. They'll go to this dealership and that, negotiate. Whereas it comes to property, as you've said, I think on one of your previous podcasts, people just, that whole sort of mindset just seems to run out the window.
You can actually test drive a car for an entire weekend. Nobody test drives a house or apartment for a weekend.
Exactly. Well, how long do you spend for an open inspection when you go in for an inspection of an apartment?
Yeah. Sometimes not even half an hour.
Yeah.
There have been people that bought a property. I've known them, when I was selling, although we used to do 45-minute inspections back in the old days.
Yeah.
But people would come through one inspection and they've bought a house or an apartment. Outrageous.
Yeah. And I think that comes out of, if you've been looking for 6 months or 3 months and you've been to 100 open homes and you've missed out on 3 places, you are so desperate to buy something and then finally something comes on and you think it ticks all the boxes. You're going through these rose-coloured glasses. This is a perfect property. You're in and then the agent's kind of telling you what you want to hear and then it all happens extremely fast and then that might be the Saturday. You might be making offers Saturday afternoon, haven't done all your due diligence, your contract checking, etc. You've already committed to buying it mentally. You slept on Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday morning. You don't even want to go and look at it again. You don't slow down. And in a hot market, I think that's what a lot of people have done. And it's not till they get the keys 6 weeks later.
The pre-settlement inspection is usually the reality check. Oh, is that what I bought?
Yeah, and the water pressure's so low and things like that.
You're stuck with it. So when back to Strata, I think that's quite interesting what you're talking about at Newington, that you really could see the difference between those purchasers that had got the correct advice and the right advice at the outset. Not only did they, obviously they still bought into the scheme, it didn't stop them buying into the scheme, but they were more educated and had their expectations set better.
Exactly.
So that's obviously going to lead itself to a better experience as an owner as well, well as getting on with your neighbours better.
Yeah, because a lot of community associations actually have an architectural code, which is why they all have a certain look, and that's why you buy into them, so because you obviously like that look and you want to maintain the values. And when people start putting things that detract or conflict with the architectural code, that's when a lot of the problems begin. And a lot of people don't even know there is an architectural code. I mean, it even dictates sometimes what colour blinds you can have, what type of pebbles you can have, what type of plants you can have in the garden. So if you don't know you're buying into that, I mean, you might like it and you think, oh, this is lovely, and then you start pulling things out and putting roses in when it's supposed to be, Australian natives, for example. And then, you get a letter from the strata manager and then, there's obviously people don't like getting letters saying, you've done the wrong thing when you think that you're doing the right thing. You're trying to beautify your own property. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And you're right, expectations are then affected because you think, oh, hang on, I thought I was buying this house for me and now I can't put the plants that I like. And
it's a small issue really, but you still feel like it's a big issue to you because you didn't know about it and you probably should have known about it, but you don't know about it. And then you still have to pay this $1 million mortgage and you're in this house and you've got this negative feeling towards it. And it just
it puts spiraling. A bad taste in your mouth, I think, when that happens.
You made a really interesting line there where you said detract the value of the property and keep the value of the property and invest into the property.
Yeah.
What's your experience when some buildings are bought mainly by investors?
Yeah.
And investors generally want to minimise the cost on the investment because they want to pay off their home loan and live a good life and those sort of things. Those type of buildings where vast majority are owned by investors that sometimes get run down. Have you seen that before?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think in the buildings where you have the majority of investors, the maintenance of the building is lacking because unfortunately there are only a few usually owner-occupiers and when you don't have any buy-in from the majority of the owners who want to invest and who want to maintain their property values, that becomes a problem. But in community associations, for example, in some of the clauses contained in the community management statement, they have to paint. So we've had success where someone doesn't want to paint their house and, the paint's falling, the timber work's rotting. We just go in there, we write to them, we say, if you don't, it's actually stronger than a council, really.
Wow.
We've written to them. If they don't listen and they don't, we give them like 14 days. We don't want them to paint in 14 days. We want obviously a commitment to say paint within the next 3 to 6 months because obviously we understand that it's a financial commitment to do so. And then when they don't do that, we go to mediation if we have to at fair trading. And, and eventually we've gotten orders where that makes them do it. So, and
could you force them to sell the house?
We can if they don't pay their levies. Usually we've had a few bankruptcies, but usually what I find the last minute, they get the money. We haven't had to actually bankrupt anyone. It's gotten very close. We've been in the federal court bankruptcy proceedings and it's cost a lot of money because you're in that jurisdiction. But unfortunately, I think people don't really understand, levies and the whole thing, and they may fall into financial hardship. I don't know. Sometimes people just don't want to pay. They don't see value in levies. And so unfortunately.
Well, that's right. If the benefit's not so much benefiting them, but it's benefiting the building and it's benefiting other neighbours more than them.
That's exactly right.
They say, well, what am I getting?
That's exactly the words I use. What am I getting out of this? Like I pay all these levies and what do I get?
It's really funny, isn't it? Because I heard this, I think Amanda said this in one of her episodes, or I think it was one that she was with you, about you buying into a democracy.
Yes.
Maybe you said it.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard that before. And I thought, wow, that is so true, isn't it? And in fact, a lot of buyers say to me, I don't want to buy into strata because I don't want to have other people having a say over what I can and can't do. And I think if you know that going in, and that's probably a good person not to buy into strata.
Exactly.
But for those that are buying unwittingly, just they don't know what they don't know. I think that's important that they really need to understand. They've got to play their part.
Exactly.
They've got to toe the line.
Well, the Act requires the Owners Corporation to maintain and repair common property. So there's a statutory effect in the legislation that makes the Owners Corporation do so. So we've had instances just recently where I had an apartment, there was a leak from the roof membrane above, and what had happened, the membrane had been repaired by the Owners Corporation at great expense, but then there was a contractor who I think put some anchor points or did something, and they pierced the membrane. This resulted in water penetration into this apartment, and unfortunately the previous managing agent just, didn't attend to it. This owner then had to vacate her tenant. She was living, into sort of in the country. She was having to come down to Sydney and, travel expenses, accommodation expenses, like nearly $50,000 later, suing the Owners Corporation.
Yeah.
And basically the Owners Corporation had to settle, had to pay her. And because you have to repair and maintain common property. And if someone suffers loss and damage as a result of that negligence of the Owners Corporation to do so, then now the avenues of recovery are much stronger now than they were even in the previous legislation. So consequential damage, for example, to your furniture, like let's say there's a leak. Before that, they'd say, well, you've got to pay for that now. No, it's a consequence of you not fixing that membrane. So,
and I think the important thing to note there is that the roof is common property. It's not just belonging to the penthouse.
Exactly.
It actually is the roof of the entire building.
That's right.
And if the penthouse leaks, ultimately the next one down is going to leak and so on throughout the building. And I guess the ground floor apartment's going to be saying, I don't want to spend money on that because it doesn't affect me.
Yeah, or I don't use the lift, so why do I have to pay towards lift maintenance? I'm on the ground floor, for example.
Isn't that factored into the unit entitlement?
Yeah, so the value of the lot at registration of the strata plan is valued and is ascertained at that point. So unit entitlement reflects the value. So the value is market value, not sort of square meterage. So you might have a tiny apartment at the top with views. It may be the same unit entitlement as a ground floor apartment with 3 bedrooms, for example. So it's based on market value. So so the unit entitlement is still less, but you're contributing towards something that in your mind you don't use. Whereas living in strata, it's communal living and, you've got to share expenses. Sometimes, you pay more for this, less for that, but it's all swings and roundabouts really.
I guess when you're buying into these buildings and as an investor, let's say, and as strata management companies managing it, aren't you at the mercy of how good they are?
To a large extent, you are. And unfortunately, sometimes, we've had to resign from buildings when they don't actually fulfill their statutory duties or they try and do things outside the law, because as an agent, you're also liable. If the owners corporations get sued, you could also be sued as an agent. And we try and make sure that we document everything in writing. We tell people you've got to repair this owner's been coming, you've got to raise a special levy. We don't have enough funds, but unfortunately we've got 3 quotes now. They're all in this magnitude. We have to have a general meeting. We have to raise a special levy if we don't have the funds, because unfortunately, that owner can then take action against the owner's corporation. So, and some buildings just don't want to spend any money, and they're fighting. I've got one particular development, which is a small one, and it's all about a work health and safety report, which had been approved at the AGM, but they don't remember approving it. And one particular person doesn't want to have it. And we should be exempt. We're not, this is not commercial. And I said, no, it's about your common law duties in terms of mitigating the insurer's risk, because obviously if there's something that affects their risk and we were not attending to it as an owners corporation, they can reduce their limit of their liability towards contributing to any payout if there's an insurance claim. And people have actually died. I had someone in Queensland, and not in a building that we used to manage, but our company used to manage. And basically, I think someone had put wooden planks over a hole that they were still working on, and she fell in and she actually died. And so again, what you can imagine what's going to happen when, so unfortunately, the ramifications of work health and safety, and for contractors coming to do work on the common property, that is their workplace. We have to make sure it's safe. Like we would in any of our offices make sure our workplace is safe for our employees. Well, for contractors, the owners corporation has to make sure that the common property that the contractors are coming to do work on is safe. Even though they have their own insurance, that doesn't limit the liability of the owners corporation. So
if you've got a situation where you've got owners that are reticent or resistant to spending money to maintain the building or do or follow through with these compliance measures that they need to do, you will resign.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if that building puts us at risk, then there's no point, there's 100%. No amount of money that's going to be worth it, especially when you can see the writing on the wall sometimes and you think it's not worth it. I mean, you don't want to be associated with these types of buildings. You don't want to manage people that don't want to look after their investments.
And you don't want to buy into them either.
Exactly.
What are the signs, do you think, a buyer can see? I mean, I've got my own ideas on this, but I'd love to hear from you. What are the signs that a buyer can look for when they're actually going to a building to inspect an apartment?
I think they should probably look at the last few AGM minutes, not just
before they even get to the strata report. Do you think that there are giveaways at the property itself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you can see if a building is tired, if it's dirty, if there's, like paint coming off. Sometimes you can get a general feel of a building that's neglected versus one that's well maintained. I mean, I've been in some buildings in the foyer and you walk in, it's just, it may not be brand new, but it's clean, it's gleaming. You can see there are signs, say in the lift, about people putting rubbish. So you can see that there's someone cares, there's a care factor there.
That's a good point.
Whereas sometimes in some buildings, you walk in there and you just feel like dust in the corner. Obviously the cleaner hasn't got to it or a light's not working. I mean, it may have just happened that weekend, but you don't know. Sometimes a light could be out for 2 or 3 weeks and the committee's, saying, oh, well, that electrician's cheaper than that one. And I'm thinking, this is urgent. Like if someone falls over because it's dark after hours, we need to get this fixed.
And so I think Chris earlier was alluding to this idea that there's a lot of buildings out there where you've either had a lot of, I don't disparage against elderly people, but often when there's a lot of pensioners, they don't have a lot of spare cash, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to be voting for special levies or increasing this capital works fund.
That's exactly right.
Sake.
Yeah.
And then if you've got buildings where a lot of elderly people and a lot of investors have owned and not a lot of younger or working owner-occupiers.
Yes.
So there's often that lack of attention to this ongoing investment in the building.
I manage a building in Randwick that's actually got that composition of owners and investors as you're referring to, Veronica. And unfortunately, thank God the chairperson, who is one of the younger person who's working, has said that when I took them over, they had like $1,000 in their trust account.
Yep.
$1,000. They were paying their insurance off by installments. They had to get a loan through the insurance broker to pay their insurance premium. And that's how bad it was. And I said to them, sorry, but this cannot continue. I did a whole budget. I went line by line. I went through every single contract. I explained every single figure and how it was calculated. So people understood. And once they understood, then her and I were able to then impart that to all the owners. I mean, some were obviously reluctant because they said, well, they're asset rich and cash poor, unfortunately, because as people get older, they don't have the liquid assets. But they also understood that their asset. And in some cases, a lot of owners had water penetration through the balconies, and some of these pensioners were affected. And in a sense, when it comes to their thing, they could see, well, maybe I need to.
All of a sudden they're motivated.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, sometimes you need those types of experiences where people are suffering themselves for water or any other damage to get them motivated to try and raise levies. So now, I mean, the levies went up, like, let me tell you, like they went up threefold.
You have to, yeah.
Huge. And again, someone is trying to keep them low, even made disparaging remarks about myself and the chairperson in an effort to try and reduce them. And finally, we were able to explain again, every line item, what works.
Money's not getting spent. It's only going to the kitty, and the kitty's going to be used for the building.
Yeah, but we have money that we need to spend. There is water penetration to garages, into apartments. I mean, water is horrible. It's mold, damp, especially with this recent rain we've had.
Water is the worst thing in a building.
Exactly. And it could cause
long-term damage.
Long-term damage because it can cause concrete cancer.
Yeah. And that's the worst thing that you really want in a building, because the cost of getting into that and chasing it into the floors of every single apartment.
Exactly.
It's a nightmare. But I often think, I look at these buildings and I think sometimes there are opportunities for new people to get in, and you can see that there's going to be a change of the guard.
Yes.
So there is a great opportunity to buy in as long as you get that apartment cheap enough.
Yes.
Because you are paying for the sins of the fathers, in the sense that the previous owners have got away scot-free. They've sold out and they've never really paid appropriate levies. And so if you buy into a building like that in a boom, you're probably going to be overpaying.
Yeah.
If you buy into a building like that now, when it's harder to sell stuff like that, it could be a real opportunity if you can see that, you know what, I think someone else has recently bought. In particular, if you look and say, okay, for the last 5 years, there's a couple of new owners in that building and I buy in, I'm going to bandy up with them and hopefully we'll lead a charge.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. It's good to know, Veronica. Yeah, I wasn't aware, because obviously I'm on the other side of things, so I only know when something is being sold, not that whole sort of market type thing that you're referring to. So,
well, an interesting thing a client's doing at the moment, he's got a block of 6 units. He's got one of the unit in the 6 in Dover Heights.
Yep.
And he's gone out the front. He's got a little yard, and out the back they're on the cliff. So they've all kind of come up with this little agreement, because there's only 6 in the block, and they're all doing a trade. So one's getting the front yard, one's splitting the backyard, one's getting the roof space.
Wow.
And then there's one person that doesn't really get much, but they're going to get cash.
Oh,
and
that's
so
very great. Yeah.
And now it's and they're having to kind of talk each other through it, and they're all kind of making deals. And it's like dragging people in the hallway who want to make a deal here. And so, I mean, that's the power of smaller developments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I live in a block of 6 apartments, and we did a similar thing many years ago. We actually live in a company title building, so there's another form of ownership.
It is, yes.
Where the company actually owns a building, and you're just a shareholder that basically owns X amount of shares that allows you to live in this particular apartment and take carriage to this garage, etc. That's another
I love your terminology. It's so professional. Take carriage of instead of just use the garage.
That's right. It's not really yours. You only have shares, remember?
I love it. Take carriage of.
It's like being a shareholder in Woolies. No, it's not. Anyway.
You don't get to use that shelf in Woolies though.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. You're lucky to get a discount. And we decided many years ago that we would extend everyone's balconies out to the perimeter of the building. So some people got a little bit of space. Some people got a lot of space. But unfortunately, you only go out. So we didn't give anyone cash because everyone got something. Some people got more than others, but that's a great way. But I think for us, we had to obviously change the shareholding stayed the same, but obviously it's a different form of getting it over the line because obviously, with companies, you're regulated by the Corporations Act, not the Strata Scheme. Another.
You've seen lots of developments and lots of different builders from, you've got the big names out there that do lots of big buildings. You've got the kind of little kind of developers that are doing maybe their first building and maybe they've done 10.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, if you're buying a new building, you should always review the developer and make sure they're established and make sure they're a good builder.
Yeah.
Does that really make a difference?
It does to an extent, but all the big companies, whether it's, Mirvac or Crown or any of them, they actually use shelf companies for development. So they establish another company. So you're not actually, the head company is not the one that you're buying from. It's another shelf company that they actually establish that you're buying from.
Just in case it doesn't go well so they can close it.
Exactly. But I mean, obviously the Act is now looking at, bonds for developers, et cetera. So that's a new area of the law that's being put in to try and give owners some recourse in the event of defects. But the more reputable developers and builders will always come back and they will always, you'll obviously have to get a report and it'll be a bit of argy-bargy, but overall, high-quality developments, usually minimal defects that are structural, because the structural ones are the ones that are costly, not the cosmetic type ones.
Yep.
And they'll usually come back, whereas some of these other builders that are new, it's all about getting it out there, getting it built record time.
Built and sold.
Exactly. And I mean, some people, what they've bought, there's cracks in slabs, there's water coming in everywhere. Paid over $1 million, like 800,000, 900. I'm thinking, my God, it's just so much money to pay. And then they're paying all these levies, because in order to take the developer to court or the builder, I mean, you need, lawyers, you need consultants, and even though this is occurring, you've still got to maintain the common property. So there was actually a legal case where someone said, okay, that's fine, you're doing that, but I'm getting water penetration. You need to fix my damage. Yeah. How you deal with the developer and the builder is something that will happen eventually, but can also affect your rights. If you're fixing stuff they should have fixed. Where does that?
So would you prefer to manage an older kind of 1960s, 70s building with 10, 20 apartments, or a new 2005 100 apartments?
I think it varies. It depends on the people, really. I find that I like working with people, and if you have a good committee and people are committed to, it's a harmonious building, well run, people look after the asset, they want to make sure they comply with the act and do all the right things. I don't care if it's 8 lots or 150 or 300.
Yeah.
As long as, people are – sometimes when there are defects for the newer buildings, it can be quite stressful, because there's a lot of, you're dealing with lawyers and because you've got – the levies are getting so much higher because you've got to pay for expert reports and lawyers. It gets really hard, I think, on people, and it can make people more sort of frustrated and aggressive, more than they would normally be under normal circumstances. Under pressure, yeah.
And I would imagine that there's a lot of first home buyers buying into new buildings.
Yes.
Largely because governments keep pushing them in that direction, which I really wish governments would stop doing, but that's another topic for another podcast. So you've got a lot of first home buyers who've scraped together every cent that they have in order to buy the place in the first place. Where do they get the money for the special levies?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, I remember in my building, we had a huge levy at one stage, and, like if you don't have 30,000 sitting in the bank like that, they have to, unfortunately, use credit card debt or borrow from someone. I mean, sometimes the levies can be quite huge, and you're right, people have scraped through, or someone's just had a child and they're just, like temporarily out of the workforce and something happens. So I think, I can understand it'd be quite stressful when, you weren't expecting that to happen, and it does happen. That's why, again, you come back to the strata search that you mentioned before on your recent video, Veronica. You've got to make sure you do research and understand that what is the potential for a special levy? What is the potential for levies going up? Is it something I should know about in this building that maybe I can afford in the next 1 or 2 years? But who knows if it triples, or sometimes you can there is information there.
Yep.
And you see people complaining about stuff that's not fixed. You think, well, eventually it's got to be done. What are we thinking about in cost?
Yeah, have they made any inquiries or investigations into what's needed to be done and how much that might cost? I mean, I see that in strata reports where there's always whinging about stuff, no evidence that's been addressed in any way, and so it just could be a monstrous can of worms. But what about a new building? Because there's none of that history.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the problem too, because now developers have to provide what we call a maintenance schedule, so it's got to provide every single asset and how it's maintained and the cost of maintenance.
So is that like the
capital fund forecast? Yeah, So I remember you referred to that, and you're right about that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But it's basically like a maintenance schedule of all the assets of the building and how it's going to be maintained and contracts, etc. So to an extent, it sort of is like the starting point of that, because whereas the capital fund forecast that you referred to in your recent LinkedIn video talks about what you have to raise every year, and even though you're right, it is compulsory to have this, anyone can prepare it, not even a quantity surveyor at times. And you're right, some people get the cheapest report. I mean, I've had reports where it talks about things that aren't even in that building. Like one report talked about sail shade awning. I'm thinking there's no sail shade. So they use these.
Talk about a template.
Exactly, a template document. And you think, oh my God, like how accurate is this? But
it's like when I see a contract to sale and in there's a swimming pool clause and the property doesn't have a swimming pool. And you go, oh, well, the lawyer didn't pay any attention to the clauses in this contract. They just pulled them out of a filing cabinet, slotted them in, and that's it.
Exactly. That's right. I mean, sometimes, when you think about the fact that you're relying on this report to raise levies. And as an owner or a future investor in the property, you're relying on them to think, well, hang on, and so it can be quite problematic.
But that still doesn't take into account the idea that, well, if it's been built badly,
No.
that stuff's not going to be flagged in that. You're not going to find that out until it starts raining or
No.
until your pool on the roof starts leaking or,
exactly.
or until
Yeah.
somebody complains.
Yeah,
And
I mean, that report assumes everything as it was at the time of inspection has a lifespan based on where it is in its life cycle, and then therefore you can try and amortise the cost of the plant and equipment and painting, etc. over a 10-year period is what the reports have to give now. 10-year forecast.
I've got a client at the moment just recently, and they came to me and I was like, well, we've got a building. It's a newer building and it's not, they're overlooking quite a busy road and not their forever house. They were a first home buyer. They bought into the building and then he works in construction. So then he's like, well, I'm going to go on the strata. And then, so he goes on the strata and he just starts finding all problems with the building and they keep finding more and more. And he's trying to do it a real professional job on the strata. And everyone's saying, mate, we can't do it like this because we don't want to get this into the report because then if other people start hearing about it, and it became this kind of, he's trying to do things by the book and they're trying to keep things off the strata.
You'd be surprised at some buildings, like let's say I'll go to a meeting and I do the minutes and they'll say, no, take that out. Because again, if someone's buying in, because it's going to affect the values of our apartments. And I think to myself, well, because we only have partial delegated authority under our agency agreement, so I'm not the full secretary, I only have partial. So if the secretary tells me you've got to amend that, as long as it's not illegal, like taking something out is not as bad as, totally misstating a fact. But
well, it's lying by omission.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes I'll just say, well, to people, okay, if you want to do that, it's fine, but off our letterhead. Like, you want to issue these minutes in this form? Fine. Off our letterhead, you will issue them. We will say that you've prepared these minutes. We haven't prepared them because, when something's not right, you don't want to.
So there's a tip for buyers. If you see the minutes and they're not on the letterhead of the strata manager, then ask why.
Yeah. Well, sometimes they like to hold their own meetings, Veronica, because they want to save money. So they don't want me to attend because obviously there's an hourly rate that we charge for attending meetings. So in one particular case, I just had received some minutes. So it's interesting when I read minutes that other people have prepared because when I train my staff to write minutes, I always tell them that you need to write minutes so that if you weren't at the meeting, would you understand what happened? Because sometimes when you're at a meeting, you understand what you mean because you were there. You understand the context. You understand what was said. But for a third party, like you're assisting a buyer, Veronica, and no one's ever seen, you've never actually been to that building, then how would, you're reading it with sort of, to me, it's not necessarily clear what they're trying to say. So this particular minute said, we approve the quotation from the window company, option 1. What does that mean?
Well, it's the same for me for file
That was $120,000 option 1, actually.
Option 1, yeah.
120.
Where's option 1?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What is option 1 costing?
Yeah.
Now, they have their own meetings, but unfortunately, if I was a buyer reading these minutes, now I had the quote, so I went up and got the quote and said, option 1's that. But again, they only have 120 in their whole account. So again, I don't know how they're going to be doing option 1 when that's all they have in the bank.
Now, just with that client, I was
wishful thinking once again.
Yeah.
that story that I was just explaining there. I mean, so once they kind of got everything that was wrong with the building, they went and got all the quotes. But what do you do is if you own that building and you want to get out because long term it doesn't suit you.
Yeah.
Are you best to kind of usually wait till all the works are done? Are you just best to try to sell it on the market? For these guys, they were in their heart, they were thinking, well, we're going to be better to sell this once everything's fixed.
Yeah.
But that was going to take years.
Yeah, and also the amount you've got to put in terms of levies. And again, obviously I'm not in real estate as in like the selling side of it, but how do you know what the market's going to be like by the time you want to sell?
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Are you better off cutting your losses and running, or are you better to, have some work starting to at least so that prospective purchaser could see, well, hang on, they are doing some work. So even if one project is completed or being completed, it might give the building, and other buyers some confidence that this building does actually want to fix it. But
the end of that story is they did try to just sell it now with the strata report, which documents higher special levies, which is basically painted a pretty bad picture of the building.
And how did he go?
Needs all this work. And they sold on the open market to someone who never did the strata report.
Wow.
There you go.
And I was about to say that. You can put it on the market. Just hope you get one of those idiots. Talk about a property Dumbo.
Yeah. And so, they were stressed about it. He did all the reports. He got all the quotes. They'd planned for these big $40,000 special levies.
I think that proves karma.
Yeah.
I think that actually is a really nice story. They've done the right thing and some other idiot has not even taken advantage of it, God.
So, but did they sell it at the price that they wanted to? Because I know
They've got even higher than they thought they were going to get.
because I've got a building at the moment where there's a fire order, and unfortunately, this committee is not acting quickly enough. And this woman was on the committee, and she said, "Reena, I've had enough. I don't care. I'm going to sell this apartment. I don't care if I lose money on it. I just want to be out." And so I think, I hope she gets a good price. But your example sounds like a pretty good story.
Serviced apartments, I got a really horrible experience with those. Serviced apartments is something that very few investors buy, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But if they do buy them, the experience they get is horrendous generally. Can you explain, I guess, sometimes people, if they're thinking about investing, they think they're a great investment because they promise guaranteed rent and things like that. Can you give us an example of how serviced apartments really work on you work with them?
The only experience I've had was in a large building in Sussex Street, down sort of towards the Harbour Bridge side of it. And I remember there was a company, I think it was called The Oaks, and they end up sort of buying a lot of apartments renting apartments from owners and obviously providing returns. But there were a lot of complaints by the residential owners because, again, there was no consent and there was a whole big, this is like 10 or 15 years ago this happened. But I don't really have much experience with the direct contact between the company and, the owners. The part that I'm more involved in is the other residents who are owner-occupiers and how they basically have to deal with this transient population where people don't care and they, suitcases, hit the walls as they're leaving, or they don't recycle and they put rubbish in the wrong bins, or rubbish overflow, or they have, parties and things. And
well, another can of worms we could get into, but we won't right now. So the whole Airbnb thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the Capital Works Fund forecast.
Yes.
Now, it used to be known as the Sinking Fund forecast.
Yeah.
I've been interested in this because in recent years it was legislated that every building had to have one, and that was phased in over some years, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's also, as I understand, legislated they need to get it updated every 5 years.
That's correct.
However, it's not legislated that they need to follow it.
That's exactly right. And that's the problem that we have, because to me it's like a toothless tiger. There's no point having a report that you don't have to even stick to or even look at. So I think what we try and tell our owners is that please use it as a guideline, even if you don't want to sort of raise exactly what it's saying. Sometimes things have to be brought forward. Like it might say year 6 you've got to, do some painting, but maybe actually year 4 that painting has to be done because it can't wait. And sometimes some things can be pushed out. Obviously, it's an average of their life expectancy in terms of what the report says. But I also use it as a tool. So let's say in this particular building where we referred to, where you have the older people and the few young people, and the forecast is saying we should raise 60. And I'm saying let's raise 30 at least. So at least I use it as a tool to say, hang on, you don't even want to raise levies. The report's saying 60. You need to have a closing balance of X by financial year ending 19. I'm saying we need to at least raise 30.
Keep going, yeah.
Yeah, so at least to me, even if they don't follow it, which I think is difficult, but at least if I can use it as a tool to say, you're only raising half of what you should be, so you're really behind the 8 ball. But at least it's something that I have that I can attest to that's done by a professional person, and it gives me some credibility when I'm trying to fight to have levies set at a reasonable rate depending on the needs of the building.
But you're fighting for that. Now, I've met and dealt with a lot of strata managers in my time, and I don't meet many that are very proactive at all. They're very reactive.
Yeah.
They often don't lead the owners corporation.
No.
They don't make suggestions. They don't. And in fact, the building you're talking about in Dover Heights, where the 6 owners have got together.
That's a great idea.
And, there's a real value add. Imagine if you had a strata manager that provided that sort of service, but I imagine it's not within the scope because they don't pay you enough to do that sort of thing. I often find with my clients, once they buy into a building, we'll often talk about, well, is this a really active owners corporation? Do they really seem on top of it, or are they really not? There's this big continuum, or they're sort of in the middle and they're sort of a bit neither here nor there. But once they actually get into the building, they get to own the building, they actually get to meet the manager, they go to the meetings and all the rest of it, they start to get a real feeling for the quality or calibre of that managing agent.
Yeah.
Now, how do they go through the process of trying to change agents?
Okay, well, under the new legislation now, before an agent could be appointed for X amount of years, there was no sort of limit in legislation. Now the maximum is 3 years. So every strata management contract now can't exceed 3 years, and therefore you have to look at the current agency agreement and see how long you're in there for and see, is it coming to its expiry? That's really the only time that you can change. But if there is disputes or non-performance, then you can go through the dispute resolution clauses that are contained within the agency agreement. And now you can even go to the tribunal. The Act now allows for more action to be taken against strata managing agents for not complying with their obligations pursuant to their agency agreement. But also people don't really understand, as you were saying before, Veronica, what is contained in the agency agreement? What am I being paid to do? What is then charged at an extra rate? Because I just had a recent building that came to me and they said to me, I gave them a quote and they said, you're more expensive agents. I said, well, I understand that. I said, but basically I said, if I look at 2 buildings side by side, I know what I will charge. Let's say they've both got 12 apartments, 1 roof, one's highly tenanted and they don't maintain the building. The other one's got occupiers and they care and they report things and repairs are attended to in a timely manner. Well, then I can charge you the same, what we call our base management fee to do certain things. But then anything outside of that, I said, I'll be writing letters, issuing work orders for that building that's highly tenanted and has complaints, whereas the other one that's run smooth, how can I charge you the same price? It's because you've got 12 apartments. That means nothing.
Interesting.
Yeah, so people don't really understand, like, in terms of managing agents' work and what we have to do. And I actually have a client who I used to manage his building when I first started at my previous company and in 2003. Anyway, and so he was with us for a long time. Then obviously, he went to another manager and ended up leaving. But now he's become a strata manager. And he said to me, oh my God, Reena, I didn't realise I was such high maintenance. I said, yeah, you were. But they don't realise all the work that's involved. Yes, Reena, I didn't realise that you did all this. And I said, yeah, people don't understand, you only see sort of the face of the manager at the meeting and occasional emails, but you don't really understand what's happening. Probably the same as property managers. People
well, I
don't
mentioned
understand.
There's always, in every profession, there's, people who are great, there's people who are average, people who are good and things like that. So I imagine the amazing ones are doing all these extra things.
Yeah.
And I guess
but there's not many in strata, unfortunately. It's not really a profession that's you're right about what you're saying, Chris, but unfortunately in strata, because the barrier to entry has been quite low, it's really, unfortunately, not sort of.
Oh, I've got the same issue with buyer's agents.
Yeah.
I guess the learning here for buyers is that if you have bought into a building and the strata is not really managing it in a way that's really getting the best result for the building, and don't be fearful about changing your strata manager.
No, definitely not.
Get the voice in there, get to the meetings, find some alternative options.
And see what's
proactive.
happening. Yeah, and see, is it the manager, is it the committee? Maybe the manager's trying, but the committee's sort of blocking every attempt. So, come to the meetings because you can come to the meetings and you can listen. Yeah. Even though you're not on the strata committee, you can come to a meeting as an owner and listen to what's happening. Yeah.
But then you can apply to join if you're an owner.
Well, only if there's at the AGM, that's where the election takes place of a committee. But if there's a vacancy, if someone resigns or sells and there's a vacancy, you can join. But the number is actually set at the beginning.
Maximum 9, right?
9, yeah.
And, some buildings are like cartels.
Yeah, oh my God.
There are some buildings, and I can see that quite often in the strata report too.
I love that. Cartel. It's exactly what happens.
Yeah. There was one property I looked at for a client some years ago in Darling Point, and it was really interesting because there was no money in the sinking fund. And yet they had, a pool and they had a whole range of their lift. They had really expensive things that could go wrong. And then I look back in the history and they had a history of raising special levies whenever they needed anything done, right? So they just did not want to put money in there, having it sitting there. They wanted it in their own bank accounts.
That's what they say to me often. Why should I have it sitting there getting no interest when I can use the money and invest it elsewhere?
But the thing was that they had this, and they had, they had barristers and SCs and, seriously influential.
And everyone wants to be in charge.
Oh, yeah.
They all know more than you.
and this one was classy because what they did, so they put solar heating in for the pool, and it was basically a couple of people just decided they were doing it. They voted it in and they just slapped a special levy on everyone. Everyone was forced to pay because a few people decided they needed solar heating. And it was like that was the culture of that building. And I said to my client, you know what? Yeah, sure. Stuff gets done. Sure, your levies are low. That's why your levies are low. You get whacked with special levies whenever someone else decides they want to do something. It's on their agenda, not yours. Don't buy into that building.
Yeah, exactly, because especially if you're not in that intellectual league of that building, I'll definitely have a go at you, which happens. Yeah. And I think also in my more prestige buildings, I find that obviously people are very successful in their own lives and in their own professions. And they run the building as if they're the CEO of the building. It's like, no, we're not your employees. It is a democratic, it's a democratic process to an extent.
Every week we hear incredible stories of the dumb things property buyers do, dumb things that end up costing them a whole lot of money and or creating a whole lot of stress. Mistakes that can be avoided. Please, Amanda, help our listeners out here. Give us an example of a property dumbo. We can all learn what not to do from these stories.
Yeah, so I've got actually two examples. One was someone that actually bought into an apartment building and they actually had a pet and they didn't realise that in the bylaws you couldn't have a pet. So this person, this is quite a strong building in terms of cartel, as you were mentioning. They tried to then get a bylaw put on the next AGM, which they did to allow pets, and that got squashed. That person who'd bought this really expensive apartment had to end up basically renting it out elsewhere because it would not entertain having a pet there. Another one I had last year.
Just while you're there, that's happened exactly the same thing to a client of mine.
Oh, there you go.
And fortunately, they approved the dog because it's a little dog and they went through so much pain and stress, but they finally got approved. But they just spent $900,000 on an apartment. And so it was too late. They couldn't do any. Luckily, they got the result. The dog's there. They're happy.
I know, this building.
But this person hasn't.
Oh, my God.
They're renting it out. So they bought their home, but it's not their home because their dog's more important. Or their
And also,
cat's
they
more
got CCTV cameras everywhere. They could see that this person, it's not a dog. I mean, let me tell you, it's like.
As an animal lover and a pet lover, that's ridiculous. The building should allow pets. But anyway.
Yeah, no. A lot of people said at the meeting when that was being contested, they said, well, a lot of people said, we bought into this building because you couldn't have pets.
Yeah.
That's why I bought in. So if you're going to change this, then I don't want. So again, you have this conflict of needs by different types of, the elderly people didn't want dogs, younger people wanted the dogs.
And so that buyer, did they do a strata report?
Well, I don't know. I don't recall them doing one, so I can't say. But I know another example I have was where someone did a report, but they actually relied on, they didn't do a report themselves. They relied on the vendor's report.
Oh.
Again, I thought, I don't know, again, why would you do that? But that's another story. And so after she'd purchased a property, she rang me and said, well, why are the levies still high? I know there's a fire order, but you've already raised the levy. They're already high. And I said, no, if you look at the AGM minutes, I don't know if she'd had or someone had explained them to her or the searcher had actually put in the report, but those levies were continuing for another 3 quarters at that high rate. And she said to me, but if I'd known this, I would have actually negotiated a better price with the vendor because if I knew the levy was continuing at a high rate, she thought it was just a one-off for the fire order. And the unfortunate thing with the fire order is that tenders that had been obtained were 3 years old. So we don't even have current pricing. So we're just, raising levies on an estimate. So they could even be higher. So this woman spent, I think, over $2 million in the Lower North Shore. I don't think she even lives here. I think she did it remotely. I don't think she lives in the country. And I think she must have been, I don't know who she was using to facilitate her purchase, but right on the vendor's report. And I actually read she gave me a copy of it. It was interesting because I never get to see them. So the first time I thought, and then I realised that there were some errors in there and I thought, I'm not going to say anything now. She's already done too late. I mean, and
so important just to make sure you know absolutely everything about the building, the history, the strata.
Yeah.
Once you're in, you're in. So,
that's right. And it's expensive to get out.
Yep.
Unless you have a good story like your friend that got out with getting more than he thought he'd get.
Well, that's relying on luck.
That is luck.
Likewise, those people that buy into strata without doing their due diligence, they're also relying on luck. And is just not enough luck going around.
No.
So I wouldn't rely on luck.
Definitely not. No. Please ignore that story.
Look, thank you so much for coming in, Reena. This has been so informative. And as we find in so many of our episodes, when we do interview people that are experts in their field, you just lift the veil and really just give us an inside peek. And it is a peek because, we could have a podcast on about 5 different topics that we've even just touched on today. But thank you so much. I'm sure that the listeners will really get a lot out of it. And I'd love to get you back at a future time. We'll pick a topic and we'll deep dive. Would you be up for that?
That would be fantastic. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Reena. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Strata Property, the podcast which consistently delivers to property owners reliable and accurate information about their strata property. You can access all the information below this episode via the show notes at www.yourstrataproperty.com.au. You can also ask questions in the comments section, which Amanda will answer in her upcoming episodes. How can Amanda help you today?